The news broke on a quiet Monday, catching much of the nation off guard as the sun rose over silent shipping terminals. Almost instantly, the story sent shockwaves from Washington to Wall Street, rattling markets and sparking urgent conversations among policymakers and investors alike. Former President Donald Trump, never one to shy away from the spotlight, quickly released a statement from his Mar-a-Lago estate, ensuring his voice was among the first to be heard. He called the U.S. China shipping halt a monumental crisis, one he claimed was inevitable after years of what he described as flawed and reckless trade policies by previous administrations. Trump placed the blame squarely on the current administration, warning Americans to brace for empty shelves, idle factories, and a looming national security threat that could impact daily life. He urged a swift return to America First principles, demanding immediate action to bring manufacturing back home and restore the nation's economic independence. Online, his supporters rallied with renewed energy, trending hashtags like "Trump was right" and "Secure our ports," viewing the crisis as undeniable proof that his warnings about global vulnerabilities were justified. Trump's framing of the crisis quickly turned the shipping halt into a major political flashpoint, fueling a heated national debate that spilled from newsrooms to the streets. Critics, however, cautioned against politicizing such a complex international incident, pointing out that Trump's own trade wars and tariffs had previously caused significant disruptions in global supply chains. They argued for a more collaborative, diplomatic approach, emphasizing the deep interconnectedness of global trade and the need for international cooperation to resolve the crisis. The sharply divided reactions from both sides of the political spectrum underscored America's deep and persistent political rifts, even as a shared economic threat loomed over the nation. With uncertainty in the air and the stakes higher than ever, the stage was set for a fierce and consequential debate over the nation's economic future. The world's busiest trade route didn't stop overnight. For decades, these shipping lanes had been the arteries of global commerce, moving goods between continents at a relentless pace. But then, a perfect storm hit, one that no one saw coming. A major cyberattack crippled China's largest ports, freezing cargo operations and creating a maritime traffic jam that stretched for miles offshore, leaving ships stranded and crews waiting for days. At the same time, the U.S. imposed steep tariffs on Chinese EV components. China retaliated with strict inspections and new bureaucratic hurdles for American shipping lines, escalating tensions further. Labor unrest erupted on both sides. Chinese port workers staged walkouts, demanding better conditions and pay, while U.S. dock workers slowed operations amid failed contract talks, adding to the mounting delays and uncertainty. The supply chain choked at both ends, with containers piling up and trucks idling for hours. Then, China suspended exports of critical raw materials like lithium and rare earth magnets, cutting off essential supplies for high-tech industries worldwide. This move flexed China's leverage over America's green tech ambitions, threatening to stall the EV revolution and disrupt clean energy projects. The combination of cyberattacks, trade retaliation, labor strife, and export bans brought shipping between the two superpowers to a complete standstill. The global supply chain, once seamless and efficient, was now paralyzed, with ripple effects spreading across continents. The world watched anxiously as the economic fallout began to unfold, uncertain of what would come next. America's ports felt the shock immediately. At the port of Los Angeles, the usual flow of ships from Asia slowed, then stopped. But the docks grew more congested. Thousands of containers sat stranded, forming a steel maze. Container yards overflowed, trucks waited for hours, and chassis became scarce. The entire logistics chain seized up. Port authorities faced a double crisis: imports they couldn't move and exports they couldn't ship. American farmers and manufacturers watched their goods pile up and perish. The port, once a symbol of efficiency, became a dysfunctional parking lot. Truckers and dock workers saw incomes plummet and futures grow uncertain. The ripple effects hit every business supporting the ports. The gridlock wasn't just about containers. It was about livelihoods with no end in sight. The nation's economic engine was sputtering. The U.S. China shutdown hit the electric vehicle industry hardest. American automakers, reliant on Chinese parts, saw assembly lines grind to a halt. Battery components, lithium, cobalt, graphite, stopped arriving, and U.S. plants had nothing to assemble. Production bottlenecks threatened EV targets for the year. Consumers faced indefinite delays. Wait times for new EVs stretched from months to over a year. Prices for the few available models soared, both new and used. The crisis exposed a glaring weakness in America's green energy strategy: a fragile supply chain. Automakers scrambled for alternative suppliers, but building new factories and mines takes years. The American EV dream was stuck in neutral. The road to an electric future, it turned out, ran straight through Asia. The industry faced a reckoning. The shipping crisis rippled through every corner of the U.S. economy, disrupting the flow of goods that Americans rely on every day. What once seemed like a seamless system was suddenly thrown into chaos. Just-in-time inventory systems collapsed, retailers' shelves emptied, and manufacturers halted production as critical parts failed to arrive on time. The ripple effects were immediate and severe. Workers faced furloughs and layoffs, especially in auto, electronics, and medical device sectors. Entire communities felt the impact as paychecks disappeared and uncertainty grew. The logistics industry, truckers, warehouse staff, freight brokers, saw business evaporate. With fewer goods to move, many struggled to find work or keep their businesses afloat. Small businesses, unable to get parts or products, struggled to survive. Many faced tough choices: cut hours, lay off staff, or close their doors for good. Corporate America scrambled for new suppliers in Vietnam, Mexico, and India, or considered reshoring, none of which offered quick fixes. The search for alternatives was costly and time-consuming. Air freight costs soared, squeezing profit margins and forcing companies to rethink their entire logistics strategies. Companies faced a brutal stress test. Only the most resilient survived. Many had to innovate rapidly just to stay afloat. The crisis exposed the risks of decades-old supply chain strategies, revealing just how vulnerable the system had become. For many, the only options were to absorb higher costs or pass them to consumers, leading to rising prices and growing frustration. The American workforce bore the brunt of the disruption, with millions facing job insecurity and financial hardship. The lesson was clear: supply chain fragility had real human consequences, affecting families, businesses, and entire communities across the nation. For consumers, the trade shutdown became painfully real at car dealerships. Popular EV models vanished from showrooms, replaced by empty spaces or gas-powered cars. Waitlists grew, with no delivery dates in sight. Scarcity sent prices skyrocketing. Dealers tacked on huge markups, pushing EVs out of reach for many families. Used EV prices surged, sometimes exceeding new car MSRPs. Federal and state tax credits became meaningless if there were no cars to buy. Frustration and disillusionment set in as policy goals clashed with market reality. Many buyers reluctantly returned to gasoline vehicles or held on to old cars, slowing the shift to clean energy. The crisis threatened progress on climate goals. The empty showrooms and inflated prices revealed just how vulnerable the electric future was to global shocks. The consumer's burden was both financial and environmental. As chaos reigned, experts searched for solutions. Most agreed, a rapid U.S. China decoupling was unrealistic and dangerous. Instead, they called for de-risking, diversifying supply chains without severing trade. Strengthening alliances with Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Europe became a top priority. Friend-shoring and new trade agreements could build resilience, but would take years. Domestically, experts urged massive investment in U.S. manufacturing, especially for semiconductors and batteries. The CHIPS Act and Inflation Reduction Act were steps forward, but needed faster, larger implementation. In the short term, only diplomacy could end the crisis. High-level talks between Washington and Beijing were essential to restore shipping and prevent future shutdowns. The mutual pain offered a rare chance for compromise. By mid-2025, the future of U.S. China trade was uncertain. A best-case scenario gradual de-escalation, restored shipping, and slow recovery. But even then, backlogs would take months to clear and trust would be slow to rebuild. A worse outcome: prolonged conflict, restricted trade, and persistent shortages. American companies would rush to exit China, facing chaos and higher costs. Consumers would pay more and have fewer choices. The crisis marked a turning point. efficiency gave way to resilience and security. Companies adopted China plus one strategies, diversifying supply chains. The global trading system became more fragmented and expensive. The shipping shutdown exposed the vulnerabilities of globalization. The choices made now will shape the world's economic future for years to come.